Amanda, you can't leave me. What will I do without you? I will drink the same as always, from morning to night, my husband John shouted. I slammed the front door and got behind the wheel, crying helplessly. How did it happen in our life? Why did this happen to us? A year ago, our family was an example for envy and admiration. Of course, someone else's well-being causes envy. That's how the world works. Well, get ready, Amanda. I have a surprise for you, yes, and don't forget your warm clothes. My husband, John, just loved to make surprises. This time he took my son and me out of town to ride snowmobiles. His colleague recently purchased a cottage 100 kilometers from the city. The cottage looked like a real castle of the Middle Ages. Even the turrets on the roof were present, and the fortress wall around. How do you like it? My husband asked, looking at my dumbfounded face. You know, there's something about this house that gives you goosebumps, I said. You're just cold, John smiled. Let's go to the hall. You haven't seen the fireplace yet. The castle was even worse inside than outside, but the men obviously liked it here, and I didn't argue with them. It's understandable that I didn't really like the animal faces hanging from the walls. Although the husband said that these are not real scarecrows, but a fake, they did not become less terrible from this. But the men were quite comfortable eating pieces of fried meat, sitting right next to the open mouth of the boar. Alex, my son, also, like a real man, ran around the rooms and, brandishing a toy sword, fought with improvised monsters, and I tried not to look around and admire the flames in the fireplace. Perhaps I remember this day and this castle in black tones, because these were the last hours of my former life. A little later, the owner of the house will roll out 2 snowmobiles from the garage, and one of them will take my son's life. My husband will be driving, who will never be able to get out of his own hell formed by guilt and will start drinking often. I don't know why I was stronger. It is impossible to describe the pain I have been experiencing every day for almost a year now. But I couldn't and didn't want to spill it out. My pain was with me as a part of me. No one around me suffered from what I felt. People didn't even know what it was like for me to look at their happy faces every day. Sometimes I wanted to join my husband and try to kill this pain with alcohol, but I knew that it would get even worse for me. Much worse. A drunk person is even more emotional, and feeling was our first enemy right now. It gave rise to anger, indignation, annoyance, and anger. All that my pain was living with now. My husband hid behind these emotions like a turtle in its shell. And no matter what I did, he didn't want to leave it. I wasn't going to leave him. I just lost my nerves, and I decided to leave, at least for a while. I started the car and drove out onto the road. Light snowflakes were falling on the glass, so perfect, as if they were created by a computer program. I drove forward, stopping at gas stations, drank coffee in roadside cafes. I even stopped at a hotel once to let myself sleep. There were no thoughts in my mind about the end point of the route. I moved without knowing why. Turning off the main road, I came across a small town sleeping in silence. Sitting next to one of the bad squares, I sat thoughtfully, not moving, like a frozen girl. Very soon, a knock outside the window caught my attention. Are you waiting for someone? I looked closer and saw my grandmother on the street who was standing next to my car. We got to talking. I don't know how it happened, but I soon found out that I was sitting on a stool in a cozy kitchen with blue curtains in my hands. I had a cup of hot tea with the scent of chamomile, and the napkin was wet with tears. It seemed to me that I had already cried all my tears in the first months after my son's death. But no, it turns out they are still there. I'm just tired of empty words of comfort from the people around me and decided to hide them deep inside myself. Amanda, whatever you want, but I've already spread a blanket on the couch for you. Have a rest and go on, not hurrying anywhere, Grandma Emily said, waving her hand. I accepted her offer. In the morning I woke up for the first time with a smile on my face. A clock ticked on the wall, sunlight filtered through the transparent curtains, and the smell of coffee and pastries could be felt in the nose. Don't be surprised, Grandma Emily smiled. When I have insomnia, I cook something, and today insomnia visited me especially. Here, take these cinnamon buns and don't say out loud that they are so delicious. Baking loves quiet praise. I nodded, full of happiness, and went to find my clothes, which I left here last night. In my mind, I was asking myself the question, am I crazy? I've been sleeping for 24 hours in someone else's apartment, in someone else's bed, in a city whose name I don't remember. This is some kind of nonsense. Or maybe that's how people go crazy. They find themselves in a place they have invented, but in fact they are in a psychiatric hospital. Thinking so, I changed my clothes and looked around. The room where I slept was cozy, but it didn't look like the home of an elderly woman who, as it seemed to me, was the owner. There were posters on the walls, and there was a barbell under the window, and a desk next to it. Shelves filled with various trinkets stretched above the table. I came closer and took the photo frame. The photo showed two young guys in military uniforms. Suddenly, I heard the front door open and Grandma Emily's voice shouted, "It's time for dinner. Are you still asleep?" I went out to meet her, admitting that I was really ashamed. I don't know what came over me. A good sleep is probably the cure for everything, so don't make excuses. We're going to have dinner now. I even bought a cake for tea. Let us have a holiday with you. After all, we deserve such a little joy. I wanted to object and say that it was time for me to change something in my life, but at that moment my stomach rumbled treacherously, and 5 minutes later we had dinner. The stew made from rabbit turned out to be unrealistically delicious. Grandma Emily said that she got the rabbits from her admirer, who has a huge farm in the suburbs. Imagine, he keeps 135 rabbits, and he calls everyone by name, like a crazy, but very hardworking man. He's calling me to get married, but I'm imagining life on this rabbit farm, and I'm taking time out. Grandma Emily, have you been living alone for a long time? I asked. Almost 30 years, she replied. My fate can be compared to yours, Amanda. I buried my son too, only he's a little older than yours. I'm sorry for my story, my pain will be quieter than yours, but still I have to take this pill for you. Maybe she'll help. And so my son Dimitri, although he did not go to serve in the war, but still died. The guys were playing with weapons, and by chance the bullet got to him. After the funeral, my husband and I somehow drifted apart. It was as if we weren't even related. They suffered together for 2 years, and then divorced. The husband returned to his village, and then died of drunkenness. I didn't even go to bury him. After all this, I wanted to lay hands on myself, but an old lady met me, who set me on the right path. She said that I need to live as long as I live, otherwise I won't see my relatives in the next world. They'll settle in the sky, and I'm at the bottom, because I couldn't stand it. Since then, I have been enduring and hoping to earn a meeting with my son. After her story, I didn't want to go anywhere. It felt like I'd always lived here. This woman has become my own. The next day, early in the morning, I was woken up by the doorbell. I exchanged glances with Emily and went out into the hallway together. Grandma Emily opened the door, and I stared at my husband with wide eyes. John, without saying a word, entered the apartment and closed the door behind him. Grandma Emily, looking at us, smiled and said, "I'm going to bake pancakes." "Are you a young man? Do you like pancakes?" "I don't remember. I probably do," John replied. Grandma went into the kitchen, and John and I stood there for a while. And then they started hugging. I really missed my husband. I had to explain to him why I am here. John listened attentively to me and ate his 15th pancake. "It's a good thing you didn't turn off the geolocation," he grumbled. "After you left, I broke the last bottle of alcohol. I realized that if I lose you, nothing will help. Then, when I finally came to my senses, I found you in this rundown town. I didn't understand anything, of course. The city was completely unfamiliar. I've never heard of this before. I came here on the locator, which showed that you are in this house. And, naturally, I thought that you have a lover here. I was told that your car has already been here for 2 days. I started knocking on all the apartments, trying to find you. On the second floor, the aunt, apparently the most curious, suggested where you actually live. She said that a lonely old lady lives in the apartment, not a jock lover. But I didn't believe it. My husband finished. We laughed out loud for about half an hour, and then we decided to cook dinner. We had to make dumplings together. This process was healing, it united us. We stayed at Grandma Emily's for 2 whole days. In the afternoon, we walked around the city, and then it turned out that this is not a rundown town. My husband and I held hands all the time, walking through the snow-covered alleys. Now I don't know if he was afraid that I would get lost again, or if it was caused by the atmosphere of romance that this quiet city inspired. Grandma Emily always gave us a thermos with fragrant tea, and we took buns in a small shop near the station and fed the pigeons. We certainly ate the last muffin ourselves, dividing it in half. Probably, from the outside we looked like a happy young couple, although there were empty broken vessels in our hearts. Still, we should have been back by now. A person cannot constantly hide from the world, he must be socially active. These are the rules of our society. Unfortunately, as I approached the house, I was more and more afraid that the wonderful dream of the last days would end and everything would become the same as before. But the strong hand that squeezed my palm when we approached the house, and the steady beating of my heart calmed, gave hope and filled my soul with joy. As a last resort, I'll run away again, I thought, and looking at my husband, I smiled mysteriously. We'll have to change the carpet, John said, looking at the stain from the spilled cognac. You can leave it as a memory, I said. Together we went up to the nursery and began unloading things. Our faces at the same time were rather with pleasant sadness, rather than mournful. I personally thought about who my deceased son would like to give his racing car to and what he would say when he saw the green baseball cap I bought him in Turkey. We spent the whole evening sorting out my son's things. We collected several bags to send to the orphanage and identified keepsake gifts for our son's friends. Some things were left untouched. We behaved very steadfastly. None of us has ever uttered a sad sigh or a sob. We were great. Then, lying in bed, we became even more courageous and discussed this tragedy. As a result, John realized that he was not to blame for the death of his son. No one could have avoided the accident. That night, for the first time in a long time, I fell asleep in John's arms. After 9 months, we had a baby girl. When my John found out about the pregnancy, he was overjoyed. He promised himself that he would be very careful and considerate of the child and give all his love to her. Thanks for watching. Write your opinion in the comments. I will be glad of your subscription. Love you.